it's a fight or flight response. And my first instinct is to fly away from the situation because I'm always looking for the exit. I have never once gone into a party, gone into a lunch, a dinner, a scenario without looking where the exit is and what my excuse is to leave or how I can get home. What's my route from A to B? How am I going to get away from this situation? Because I was like, okay, if this happens, I can get a line bike to the station and then I can get the train home and that will take me about 20 minutes and I can be in my bed in 30 minutes. Just as a pre-warning, I am not a mental health professional. This is just based on personal experience. Hey guys, welcome back. I'm so sorry this is late. I did film it yesterday, but I just wasn't making any sense. I was to the point where I was delirious, and this is because I had about 4 hours sleep total over the whole weekend because I went away to Belgium with a group of 8 people, and let's just say it was a bit chaotic, and it made me realize how bad my mental health was. As we all know, I always talk about it, but I tend to push it down in the real world. And when I went away, a lot of stuff came back up and I learned a lot about myself. And I kind of want to talk to you guys about anxiety, but on a real level. And I'm talking real level because this is not fun. If you feel clinically anxious, this shit is not fun. I'm not talking about the kind of anxiety where people are like, I'm anxious because, there's going to be people there and it's a party or whatever. I'm anxious, I feel like I'm dying kind of anxious, because that is me all the time. And I'm kind of at a point with it where if I don't talk about this shit, I'm probably going to drive myself insane. But I'm kind of at the point where if I ignore it, it's not happening. So it's not that big of a deal. But I kind of need to tackle it because I realised how bad it was when I went away. Anyways, so the reason the podcast is late is because I cried at a plant pot the day I tried to film it. And my boyfriend was like, Corey, you're not stable. You're not stable to film it today. And then I tried yesterday and then blah, 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 it didn't work. So anyways, we're here. The type of anxiety I deal with is derealisation / dissociation. You may have heard of this. It has been circulating TikTok. However, I do feel like the stigma of dissociation is a bit skewed. I don't think it's necessarily what people think it is. It's like kind of, I don't want to say promoted, but it's kind of just taught to be you're staring off in the distance and you're kind of dissociating with everyone else. It's really not, for me anyway. It's on a much deeper scale. It's something you can't really express the way that you're thinking, feeling, and what you're seeing. It's unexplainable to the point where you really don't feel real. Now, the way I used to describe it is something I've suffered with when I was really young, in like year 4, when whatever age that was, is the first time I recall it. I was in a lesson and I was looking at the whiteboard and the teacher was teaching, and I'd always get it in a lesson. I don't know what it was, but there was certain things that would trigger me. And the only way that I could kind of get rid of it was to escape it. And I want to talk about escapist mindset as well, because that's something I suffer with, which I'll get into later. But the only way I could describe it to my parents was I didn't feel real. So I'd always say, oh, Mum, I don't feel real. Like I'm having it again. I don't feel real. And it got to a point where my parents were very worried, obviously, as you are. So they took me to the hospital. I had loads of different brain scans. They were trying to get me to go through the episodes so they could see my brain activity as well. And it just didn't work. Nothing came up, which is a good thing, But a part of me was like, am I genuinely going insane? I just felt so isolated. And that is probably the biggest reason as to why I am like I am now, with really low self-esteem and all of that jazz. But yeah, fast forward to probably about 2020 and I had it really, really bad. And obviously on my YouTube channel, I spoke about it. And I got a comment in the comment section saying, you should listen to this podcast because I think what you're describing sounds very similar to dissociation and stuff. So I looked at it and I was like, I think I finally have my answer, because I have spent years and years thinking I am just going insane and that the thing I have isn't really real. It's just in my head. But I'm here to tell you it is a fucking real feeling, and it's not a nice feeling at all. It's something you cannot describe. The way I would describe it is you're in a really bad high. That's the only way I can describe it. nothing feels quite real around you. I've had it where like I kind of forget myself sometimes and who I am, but that's because I'm panicking so much about feeling this way. But people say that it's because something traumatic happened in your childhood, whatever. But I don't remember anything bad happening in my childhood. I had a really good upbringing when I was younger. So there's nothing that I recall that's traumatic, if you get me, which is making this more confusing as it is, which is probably why I really need therapy for it. But I've literally tried. The scary thing about dissociation, as I don't think it's researched enough. I have been to therapists where they didn't believe that it was real and they'd never heard of it before. And that to me was baffling. It made me feel 10 times worse, 10 times more isolated, and it made the situation worse for me. I was having it more frequently. So the more and more I sort of spoke about it and got rejected from that feeling, the worse it became. And I'm here to tell you, if you suffer with anything remotely like this, I want you to know that you're not alone in it. It is something that I could speak about for hours and I can still never put my finger on what it is and how to describe it because it's so difficult. But anyways, when I went away to Belgium in the weekend, I already knew I was going to be anxious for this trip. It's something about being in a city where I'm overstimulated. Any situation that I'm overstimulated, there's too much noise, too much going on, too many lights, anything it is, it's doomed to be bad. So I kind of already put it in my head that I wasn't going to have a good time, and I kind of self-sabotaged it for myself. So fast forward, we got there and I woke up at 5 a.m. at this point, and dissociation triggers me more when I haven't slept properly either. So I'm overstimulated and I haven't slept properly. So this is just a recipe for disaster. We get to Belgium, we spend the whole day traveling, and at this point we don't have what I call a safe space. I don't have anywhere I can just go back to because the Airbnb wouldn't let us in until late. So we didn't get into the Airbnb until 9:30 p.m. and we had issues with trying to get in as well, which made me more anxious. So, it was a bit of a fucked up situation, but I'm alive. I made it. It's fine. What I have to realize with dissociation is that I've never died from it. It just feels like I'm dying, and it's something that I will get over eventually. But I think the way I calm down from it all is if you just put me in a quiet room. So I do feel like I'm at that point within it now where I can recognize the triggers and recognize what's going to help me. And in the situation, it's very, very scary because even in central London, which isn't far from where I live, I can feel immediately like I want to go home right now, which leads into the escapist mindset. I like to call it this because it came to a point in conversation over the weekend, and my boyfriend said to me, Corey, you have this escape mindset where you always want to leave or get away from the situation and you don't just slow down. And it made me realize and remember something that my therapist told me a while ago, which is something that's going to make your anxiety worse is by rushing and trying to get away from it. The more you get away from something, the more it's going to catch up to you. It's kind of like a rubber band. So if something's pulling, it's going to come back at you 10 times harder. So I'm really going to try and implement slowing down, but it's so difficult when you're having a panic attack because I don't even like to call it panic attack. I like to call it anxiety attack because it's not like I can't breathe. It's just like everything around me is going 10 miles an hour. 10 miles an hour? More than that. The escapist mindset is when you just want to leave any situation when you're anxious. It's a fight or flight response. And my first instinct is to fly away from the situation. So that's where my escapist mindset comes into play because I'm always looking for the exit. I have never once gone into a party, gone into a lunch, a dinner, a scenario, a situation, anything of the above. I've never gone into it without looking where the exit is and what my excuse is to leave or how I can get home. What's my route from A to B? Can I get an Uber? Can I get a train? Do I have to walk it, line bike it? You know what I mean? There's so many possibilities that I think in my head, how am I going to get away from this situation? And the more I did that, it kind of put me at ease, because I was like, okay, if this happens, then I can get a line bike to the station, and then I can get the train home, and that will take me about 20 minutes, and I can be in my bed in 30 minutes. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like that. So I don't know if that's better or worse for my mental health, but in the moment it feels better because I have a plan. Anything that I aimlessly do, if we're just aimlessly in London or aimlessly in Belgium, just walking around, it's gonna trigger me, because I need to get from A to B. I need to have a purpose. If I don't have a purpose, I have time to be anxious, and it's nothing worse than roaming around and not having an end goal, because I'm just not that type of person that can go to a museum and just roam around. I have to actually have a purpose for being there. And I think that is solely to do with anxiety, which is such a shame, because I can never actually enjoy the present moment. I always fear the future. And I don't mean it in the sense I fear of what my future is going to be. I fear of the short-term future of that scenario. So I always think worst case scenario in every situation I'm in, which I think is a good and bad thing, but mainly kind of a bad thing, because I could be somewhere amazing. For example, when I went to Belgium, that was just a pure fun trip. But in my head, all there was going on in my head was, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is negative, negative, negative. And I had to realize I was on holiday. Why am I stressing over about things on holiday? But then it came to realize very quickly, this isn't a relaxing holiday. This is not a holiday for me personally. This is more of a traveling holiday where you are constantly busy and constantly trying to fit in the time that you have there and see all of the tourist attractions that you can. That to me is not my kind of vibe, but I'm glad that I went there and I learned that. And I also don't drink, because that sets off my anxiety as well. Honestly, take me to a spa or even just my home and we can watch a film. Like, that's my kind of holiday. I'm very much a homebody. I don't really like going out, but that's just me. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to be a homebody. But a part of me envies really, really, really wanting to be an extrovert sometimes. But that doesn't really energize me. It just drains me. From that holiday I just had, I feel like I now need a 2-week holiday from it. It genuinely was exhausting and draining. The first night I got there, I didn't eat much at all that whole trip, because my appetite was so bad. And when I'm anxious like that, I don't eat. But when I'm stressed, I do. And on top of that, I was with 8 people that didn't really get it. And I didn't want to be that downer on the holiday. And I didn't want to be that person that ruins the whole trip. Do you know what I mean? Or constantly talk about something negative. I just wanted everyone to have fun, because it's the first time we've all been out. But it was nothing worse than nobody understanding. And I got to a point where I was around the table and I said to myself, how is no one anxious right now? And then I just realized, wait, I'm just the abnormal one. Why is it so unfair that I have to feel this way on a joyful trip? And it just made me realize how I really need to figure my shit out, because I've been suppressing this shit for so long and it's finally just coming out again, and it's bad, to put it bluntly. It's just bad. If I had it my way, I wouldn't leave the house ever. And that's how I know it's really, really bad. Because in 2020, reel it back, right before lockdown, my anxiety got really, really bad due to a situation that I was in. But when lockdown hit, and then after lockdown got released, I never left the house. I was too scared to even walk up the road from my house. And bear in mind, I didn't live in a city at the time, so everything just seemed like it was crashing down on me, even though it wasn't. I felt overstimulated, even though it was silent. And this to me is crazy, because I just genuinely think it's in my head a lot, and it is in my head a lot of the time, but you know what I mean. So when I know it's getting bad is when I haven't been out the house for a while, and I kind of forget that I haven't been out the house for a while. So I'll give you an example. The first time I'll actually get some fresh air will be at 10 p.m. and I'll be like, oh my God, I haven't left the house today. I don't have a reason to leave the house right now, which is probably why as well. But the thought of even leaving the house anyway makes me want to cry. And I know that that's bad. But I am trying to, get some plans into place with my friends and go to brunch and stuff like that, because the more you seclude yourself, the bigger of a problem it is. And this is why everyone raves about exposure therapy. Can we speak about exposure therapy for a second? Now, I do believe in this, but at the same time, it's a horrible fucking thing to go through. I don't think I've ever overcome long-term a problem by exposure therapy, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. So I'll give you an example. The tube. I fucking hate the tube. I have crazy tube anxiety, and it's not necessarily the thing itself. It's fear of having this dissociation thing and fainting, throwing up, being lost and forgetting who I am. Like, there's so many things I fear that's out of my control, and that's all it is. But getting on the tube more and more, doing it more frequently, sure, isn't as bad as it is if I don't go on the tube for ages, then go on the tube. But it never goes away. It's never gone away. I've lived in London for 3 years now, and it's still as bad as it was. But it gets easier if I do it twice a day or once a day. And I do want to try and train my brain to do some exposure therapy more often, but it's difficult because you have to be willing. And when you're not willing, it's just going to make the scenario for you worse, and it's just going to stay at one level rather than get better. Now, I want to talk back to a conversation I had in Belgium. I said earlier briefly how I was with about 8 people and none of them really got it. I am very self-aware. If you are anxious like me, you will find that you are very self-aware to the point that it makes you so sad, because you can never enjoy anything because you're so aware of how you are. And on that trip, I was very aware that I was not a nice person to be around, because when I'm anxious, I can come across very rude, very blunt, very moody, and a bitch. Now, someone in that group came up to me and was like, I'm not going to lie, Corey, at first I did think you're a bitch, but getting to know you, I can understand that you're honestly just going through it. And we all think you're a great person. Like, we all think you're up here and you think you're down here. And that really spoke to me, because I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, we see you for who you are, Corey, and you are that girl. You are up here. But you think in your head, and it's so clear, that you are below everything else. And it made me think about self-esteem, firstly. Because when I had therapy, my therapist always told me you have really low self-esteem. And this is where I think the root of my problem comes from, is self-esteem, for everything, for my anxiety, for everything. And I said to them, well, yeah, I honestly don't see myself as anything better than anyone else. And I wouldn't want to. I don't want to be that person. I would love to be a bit more confident, sure. But put me up here, my ego is going to be way too high and I'm going to be an absolute arsehole. I don't want that. I never want to be that person. But I would rather suffer. This is crazy, but I'd rather suffer than be an egotistical bitch. And there's nothing better than someone being humble, but I'm humble without realizing, I think. And that's quite mad of me to say, but this is just going based off of what people have told me. So yeah, after that conversation, it made me deep a lot about self-esteem. And it's not just looks, it's everything. It's the way I am. It's my skill set. It's everything. I don't see what I do as I'm the best ever. I'm the most amazing person. I generally see it as this is a pile of shit. I'm a pile of shit, without even realizing. My subconscious will tell me. And that really manifests into your anxiety and it becomes your core belief system. When you figure out your core belief system, you can truly fix your anxiety. And I'm a big believer in that, because when I did some CBT, when I had some therapy, and that was probably one of the best therapies I'd ever had. And they made me write down my core values as a person and my core beliefs. And when I wrote them down, it really made me reflect on the person I am and how I deal with scenarios. And when you have low self-esteem, you're way more prone to being anxious than anyone else. I'll give an example, because my boyfriend is the least anxious person you'll meet. He is the most logical, extroverted guy ever, which is why it works well, because when I'm anxious, he thinks of it logically. Not that I really need the logical opinion. Like when I'm there, I need the emotional support, but he kind of makes me realize there are people out there that aren't anxious, and it just makes me think that I don't have to be this way all the time. But it's not something I can necessarily control right now, but I know it can be if I really tackle it. So yeah, that is something that opened my eyes a lot. And as women, we tend to take the emotional approach most of the time. So I think being a woman with anxiety is 10 times harder than it is with a man with anxiety, but for different reasons. And it's not me invalidating men at all, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to say the female hormones are not fucking easy to navigate at all. And when they're out of whack, which I can tell you, mine are severely out of whack. My skin is fucking bad. I've never had hormonal acne in my life, and I have that now around my whole cheek area. My emotions are fucking bad. I go from a really high to a really low. There's so many things I can explain, and it's probably for a whole nother podcast, but it's not easy and it's hard and it's painful. But I want you to know that if you have resonated with anything that I have said throughout this podcast, there is a way out. It's figuring out your core beliefs and going back and trying to discover the root of your problem. And for me, it's self-esteem. And I believe that in my core. Only you know your problems, and you don't think you do until you write it down. I've started journaling. I know that's so cliche for me to say, but it really just helps me clarify what is going on in my head. And even these podcasts, even talking to a camera and talking to you guys helps me so much. You have no idea. I'm so grateful already for absolutely everyone that comments on my videos, because it goes a long way. And even I get messages on Instagram. That is crazy to me. I get messages on Instagram and you guys are relating and we're having conversations about our problems, and I could not be more grateful for that, because it takes courage for you to come forward as it is, but to relate on that level is so beautiful to me, because it's so hard out there when you have friends that don't quite get it, or you're around family that don't quite understand, and you never would want anyone to understand because it's a horrible thing. But at the same time, you just do want that kind of outlet sometimes. And if this is your outlet, I am so pleased that it is, because it's safe. It's safe here. And I want this to be your safe space. As much as you try and find the exit for places, I want this to be your safe space to go back to when you need. I feel like I could talk for ages on this, but I don't want to speak forever on this podcast. So I will definitely do a part 2 on this if you want. Feel free to message me on my podcast, which I'll link below, my podcast Instagram or my main Instagram, up to you. It's Corey Blonde, and I will be replying because I think it's super important. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next week when I haven't had a mental breakdown over a plant pot. Goodbye.